think my journey into wine started when I was 17. Had my first glass of wine, the Johannesburger. It was a sweet white. I think it must have been like shredded in this bottle that was shaped like this. Probably stole it from my dad's wine cellar, but don't tell him that. But I think, as with all people, when you start to drink wine, it's very sweet. You don't drink red wine; it tastes like feet. So I think my journey into wine was a long one. And I think for me, my biggest inspiration in wine was my dad. I grew up seeing my dad drinking a lot of wine, drinking wine with his friends. Like I never understood why they did it, but later on, I think it made sense. So I always say I was a very good wine drinker and nothing else. I think as my palate developed, I developed a really good palate for red wine. I didn't drink any more sweet wine, but I think it just, it's that journey that everyone goes to. And I think after living all over the world and finally moving into Kenya, it was trying to figure out what do I do with my life here. And just before we had moved to Kenya with my husband, my dad had started a wine import company in Zimbabwe. So yeah, I mean, all the tastings I was there. It's like, yeah, yeah, put me there, But it started there. It started more on the marketing side, helping him build and grow his brand, starting the business with him, hosting this huge wine event in Harare that, we'd never done, we were never comfortable with, but we had all these winemakers who came and supported us. So, it kind of started there. And I remember when I moved to Kenya, he's like, yeah, you should do wine. I'm like, I know nothing about this country. How am I going to sell wine? Like, I don't know anyone. And so I think it's, he never stopped saying it. Like every 2 or 3 months, he'd be like, have you thought about the wine thing? I'm like, no, I want like a real big job. I'm a marketing guru. I'm going to be like a CMO somewhere. Like that's what I want. And as fate would have it, that was not my path. And I think it was the catalyst of him meeting you, Alistair, at Cape Wine, the man with the hat. And of course, as being my father, yeah, my daughter is in Kenya and she's unemployed. You should talk to her. And I remember, emailing you back and forth, and you were coming for the first worst of it. It was kind of like, yeah, okay. And then we met, and I think we clicked, right? We definitely clicked. And yeah, we took the conversations further. We went to Naivasha, right? Tried to hash it out. You brought us down to Cape Town, to explore. And I think it was very intimidating for me. I think moving to a new country and not being very comfortable in the wine space, and then being like, okay, fine, let me just help out. Let me just, I need something to do anyway right now. And then it just turned into this beautiful journey, this beautiful business. Yeah. So it's been like an 8-year journey, I would say. So I'm very happy to be sitting here talking competently. In the beginning, I would have been like, no. I think education, I think wine is very intimidating. I think, especially for people who look like me as well, I think we find it extremely intimidating. None of us grew up on wine farms, we don't know much. We just know what we drink. So I think for me, I think the most important thing was educating myself about what wine is and what we were going to do. And, I think when started working for you guys, I went on a training trip with Zara, and I was so intimidated because I'm like, how does she know all this stuff? Like, where does she know it from? So for me, I think the most important thing was to educate myself, understand what wine is, how to talk about it and how to educate people about it. And then also how to make it accessible, right? Because I think a lot of formal courses that we do take, right, from this side, more of a commercial side, they're very, very highbrow and they're very, very intense. But then when you try and translate that knowledge in a hospitality setting or for someone who actually knows nothing, you have to know how to how to dumb down the language and make it and make people understand. So I think the most important thing for me was the education, understanding wine, what it was, and then building my confidence and communication skills. Right, people will not believe me, but I was a very introverted person. Like I've never been a person who likes the spotlight. I think I'm more of an operator. I'm good behind the scenes. Like that's where I thrive. And this role forced me to talk to people and to interact with people, and to just get out of my comfort zone. So it was a lot about, communication, confidence, and having fun. I think that was the most important thing that I learned from everybody who was in the company at that time was like, have fun. Like, don't take it too seriously. If you're so serious, you're going to make everyone else around you feel uncomfortable. I think Alistair always said, we don't use wine bully language. We're not here to like throw out terms and, try and put people like off skelter. We're just about making wine accessible and getting people to understand what's in the glass. Yeah, so that was a big challenge. And then obviously just setting up a business. I mean, if anyone knows, doing business in Africa is like a blood sport, right? So now do an import export into alcohol, right? Everyone thinks I have this fancy, amazing job, right? But I wish I could actually show them the day to day, of it. Like, the things that you have to do on a day to day, get wine on a ship, order wine, put stickers, like all these things that people don't see. So that was a challenge. It was a huge, huge challenge. And going from a really sort of marketing oriented to a very operational, like logistics type business was a bit of a learning curve. But as we do in Africa, you just, you make it work. I mean, well, I think our passion for education comes for our love for people. We've trained over 25,000 waiters, butlers, restaurant managers, bar managers, in-shop somms, and the goal for us is for confident communicators, right? People who should be able to sell wine, but also to talk about wine and talk about the people behind the brand and why you should drink something. So I think that's been very, very important for us, creating that confidence and those communication skills. So you start from a base, wine 101. I know nothing. Let's get you to know something, right? Let's go back to the basics. What is wine, how it's made, and where it comes from, right? Once you've kind of mastered those basics, you move on to brand training, right? Let's dive in deeper into the people who make the wine. Where do they come from? How do they make it? What is their philosophy? And how does this specific wine work in a certain setting, right? As well as that, we do wine 101, we do the masterclass, then we also do bar 101, basic bar making, bar skills. And then we move on to the wine advisor, which is more of a formal setting, training you to be more of an in-house som or a sommelier in a store, which I think is important, right? But it's just a graduation of knowledge and skills, right? I mean, our mantra when we use our beverage intelligence platform is better beverages for Africa, but it's also better educators in Africa as well. So I think it's such an important journey, and it takes time, which is fine, but take time, and I promise you the rewards are they're really amazing. So I think for me, when we talk about learners in this journey, I want to highlight Adelaide Muhambi from Ngama. And I think for me, it's more important because she's also a woman, right? So a lot of the time you're out in the bush, there's a lot of men, and then you find one lady and you're like, yes. And, she was that yes for me. But I think her knowledge, her raw enthusiasm, her initiative was something that just struck a chord deep in me. So she's gone through all of our courses, our Wine 101, our brand trainings, wine advisor, and she also got to spend time in the Cape, right? I think she actually came here to Belfield, right? Spent time, got to meet winemakers, So for me, it's amazing to see her journey from where she started with someone who was passionate about wine but didn't know how to navigate that space to someone who's very, very confident. Last year when we were in Ngama, like just her enthusiasm, seeing her interact with guests, as we're changing a wine list, calling her, asking her for her feedback. What works with guests? What doesn't? Why doesn't it work? Right? And she can actually answer those questions confidently, right? And she can back up her answer. She can tell, oh no, I've had these guests repeatedly. They've said X, Y, Z about this wine, why it doesn't work. So for me, it's just that proof in the pudding. Like sometimes you have to just take time to concentrate on people and walk them through the journey. Doesn't mean the journey is easy. It's a hard journey. Like wine is not easy. I think I'm still learning, right? People ask me a lot of questions still, and sometimes I have to go to Google, but which is totally fine. But just seeing that patience, that dedication, that enthusiasm on her side, and then on our side, and even on her, employer's side, just empowering her and making sure she can achieve. So it's been such an amazing journey to see a woman in wine actually really, really excel. Through this journey of education, we realized that it's great that we go, we do live training, we leave, the learners with workbooks and information. But I think the biggest sell-in is sort of your managers, right? So it could be your restaurant manager, it could be the shop floor manager, it could be the camp manager. And we realized that we needed to empower them as well on this journey to understand, right? Because there's still a lot of support, there's still a lot of driving, there's still a lot of motivation, right? So if they understand this journey, if they understand what we're trying to do, then I think that they're actually going to be better at motivating, at tracking, the learners, and then identifying new learners, right? So what we do find is, what we do is we set an education manager for all of our clients, and their responsibility is to help drive this program, right? Because we need their buy-in as well, and they're sometimes the most important people because they spend so much time with these learners, so there's a lot of things that they can identify and see that we probably wouldn't, right? And then they can also tell us the challenges, right? Perhaps sometimes the learners are not comfortable sharing, challenges they might have when accessing the course and all of that. But if you have an education manager, you can bring up all of these issues, all of these problems. And what it does for us is that means that we're always constantly evolving, we're always constantly changing, we're always trying to make sure that we're providing the best experience. So I think it's just as important to educate the learners, but also the education managers. And when we have those, you see so much more how effective the learning program is, right? Because you have to have the buy-in. It's great that we come in and we have these great relationships with all of our clients, but it also has to be an internal buy-in into what we're doing. And I think the more that those education managers believe in the program and they believe in the people, you see that actually the learners are more motivated to complete, right? Because sometimes it is that thing, and the learner might want to do it, but they don't feel like, well, I'm not motivated. No one's going to believe in me anyway. But if you have an internal championing your progress and understanding and say, look, I've taken this course. Yeah, I know this part was also tricky for me. Maybe let's sit down. Let's sit down as a group. Let's go through that section again, and let's all talk about it, and let's make sure we all understand. Do we need to now reach out to to the under influence team and say, hey, none of us get this, how can you help us, right? So it's a very much a collaborative process, and we can only be effective if we're collaborating on that level. So I think the role of the education manager, I think, is the most important part of this learner journey, because you can get buy-in from your boss, senior management. But the people who spend the most time with these learners are the biggest motivators and demotivators to the staff, right? There are instances where you go and people will be like, well, no, it's just a waste of time. They just need to know what red wine and white wine is. And you're like, well, no, not really. But you don't disagree. You politely, swallow your pride and, smile and wave. But you see the effect of the program, and you see sometimes the effect on the staff. Then you go to a property or restaurant or shop where the education manager has invested themselves, because they believe that, look, if I do this, I know that it will have an effect on the learners, right? And it's the most important thing. Go through the journey. Like you can't understand someone's challenges until you've walked in their footsteps, right? So it's so important for that education manager. You are the biggest motivator or you're the biggest demotivator. So, it lies on you. And it's such an important thing. It can make or break a learner. And we want to make more learners. We don't want to break the learners. We need to make more learners. So I think, this whole educator role, it's always like, what next, right? It's great that I can train our clients. It's amazing. Get to spend time in amazing places, amazing restaurants, get to meet a lot of people. But then, what next, right? So our training is very focused, right? For whatever channel it is. Is it hospitality? Is it retail? Is it trade? Is it a restaurant? So this journey that I've been on with Team Wine Kenya has, humbled me a lot. I think I know a lot, but then I realized maybe I don't know a lot. Maybe I need to spend more time learning about wine of the world. Our focus is very much on Africa, wines from Africa, and that's because we believe we want people to drink the best of Africa. But especially in Kenya, there's a whole other world. There's a whole other demand for international wine, and so it forced me to go back to my books, to be like, oh gosh, remember why France was so difficult? It's like they don't put the name of the grape on the bottle, and then you have to know whoever it is, whatever chateau, whatever region, you're just supposed to know, right? And so when I was first asked to be the coach, first I was asked to be on the team last year, and I said no. And okay, notwithstanding that I'm Zimbabwean, and I was like, I just, I can't betray my country, patriotism. But last year I was like, no, happy to support you guys, and I just don't think I was in a mental space to be, competing in anything. And then this year it was okay, fine. Some of the original team members weren't able to compete this year for different reasons. One of them is having a Team Wine Kenya baby, so that was a big thing. And then two of the other ladies weren't able to do it. So, they stepped up and they're like, well, we need a coach. I'm like, oh yeah, that's great. Like, good luck. See you, I'll help you come to the warehouse. We will do a tasting. And it was a consistent, like, Diane. And Diane was like, no, because it was hard, right? And I think people always think on this side of it, everything just comes so easy to us that we just know everything, that we can effortlessly just talk about wine and all of that. So, with a little nudging from our chairman to, Deanne, you should do this. I'm like, no. And he's like, you should. And I'm like, okay, fine. I've been commanded. Not really. But, it was that thing, like, take it to that next level, right? Now you're educating people who do know about wine, right? They know quite a bit about wine, right? But now the thing is, we're in Africa. What do we drink? A lot of New World wine. Where's our palate? Fruit, fruit, fruit. That's what we can pick up. We can get it. Go to old world wines, much more austere, much more elegant, much more restrained, and just, different. All these different grapes from everywhere that you will never find anywhere else in the world. And our first challenge was trying to calibrate our palate, get away from New World and, figure out Old World, right? But that was difficult in itself. Like, I had to figure out, how am I going to train these guys? How am I going to get all these different palettes to come together and to sing the same song, right? Because they were not singing the same song at all. It was like, this is like discord. But that's the challenge. That's the challenge of it. And I had to challenge myself, right? To be like, we can do this, right? Will we become number one? Maybe not. But what does it do for people? What does it do for people in Africa? What does it do for people in the industry? What does it do for people who love wine and want to take it to that next level? All we're telling them is you can, and it doesn't mean that you have to come first, but the fact that you've put yourself out there, you've been willing to step outside of your comfort zone and to try something. And I think that's the most important thing that I would always want people to know. You don't know if you can succeed if you don't try, right? So if something looks daunting, if Wine 101 looks daunting, like, it will be, but doesn't mean you can't do it. So this is the same thing, I think, with this education has been relearning wine again, relearning about wines about the world. tasting wine, that whole blind tasting, that trying to figure out a grape just from how it smells, how it looks, all those things are very, very complicated. But I think it's just that elevation on that journey in education, right? That, unfortunately you can't be like a one horse wonder, right? You kind of have to be well rounded. And I think we're seeing that a lot more. And I think we see that a lot more because Africa is opening up in terms of wine, right? Everyone is now looking at like, oh, Africa, wow. I want my wine there. 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 And I think it's important for us on this side to be like, yeah, that's great, but just because it's French doesn't mean we're going to take it. It has to align to our customers. It has to align to our climate. It has to align to so many things. And we can't do that. We can't make those judgment calls if we don't know about wine and other things, right? So you have to taste, you have to be very, very bullish a little bit, be like, yeah, no, it's okay. Like, we do a lot of South African wine. Let's see how you compare to us, right? I think it's so, so important, especially for us, working outside of Southern Africa. I think the dynamics, on East Africa, West Africa, there's more of a demand for international wine, but we have to be well versed. And I think that's one thing that's been very, very good for me, pushing myself, relearning. Like, you never stop learning. Like, you will never, never, never stop learning. And there's so much to learn about wine, right? It's like, after this, do you become like a diploma person? Do you become a master of wine? Do you become a winemaker, right? Like, there are all these things that you will never stop learning on this wine journey. So for me, I think it's just been a very humbling experience. It's been a very fun experience. It's been a very hard, grueling experience balancing your work life, your home life, and then your team life, right? But finding that balance and enjoying the process has just been something that's completely rewarding, and I wouldn't trade it for anything else. I think for me, the most important thing has just been about representation and authentic representation. I think that there's a lot of wine in this world, but I think we're very targeted about who we work with and what we sell, and I think that's important. Like, we're always about people, right? And cultivating relationships with people, with our clients, and even with our suppliers. So for me, it's so important to have a story behind a brand, but also to have diversity and inclusion, right? I think, the wine space has completely changed. And, for me, I can't sit here and only sell wine from people who don't look like me, so it's been very, very important for me. And it's been a long journey, right? It's always trying to find a good brand fit, a wine that will work, outside of, its country of origin, because it doesn't work. Like, people just think you can just sell anything anyway. Like, that's a big lie, guys. Like, it's not. I always think wine finds a place, right? And sometimes a wine will speak to you so, so much. You do a wine tasting at like more than one property or restaurant, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it always finds a place. But it's about finding the wines that will fit, right? So it's about diversity, it's about inclusion, it's also about conservation, right? It's about sustainability, right? So I think that's been so important, and I think it's just amplifying that. When we talk about wine, when we sell wine, I think education. You need to know what you're saying. It doesn't mean you have to be a wine professional, but just be confident about what you're saying and actually understand what you're saying. Because I think sometimes the biggest put off in wine is that you have someone and they just talk a lot and they have no idea what they're talking about, no idea what they're saying. And you also have to read your audience, right? So you meet a lot of people who think they know about wine, but they don't, right? So, you always have to read who you're talking to and how you're talking to them and how you're going to sell them, right? Because if all you're doing is just blustering and telling them about all these awards that they've won, it's the best, thing since sliced bread, that's not always the thing to be able to sell a wine, You have to be able to sell a wine and talk about a wine and have a conversation about it, even as you're tasting. Sometimes the more you talk about, you build this anticipation before someone's even tasted it. And it could be the most like bog standard wine, right? But you've already sold it, you've already hyped it up, and sometimes it works. But I think it's just important to be authentic about what we sell and who we sell to, and making sure we're putting in the wines in the right places. But for me, it's the brand partners that we work with. I think we've really, really been very, very lucky to have amazing brand partners who support us, who come into the market. I think, for them as well, seeing their wine in a place, I think it gives people joy, and seeing that we're also caretakers of brands, and we really believe in what they do, and we want other people to see that. So I think it's just so important to just be diverse in what you do, right? And be able to push the boundaries and be able to talk about the stories, and don't be uncomfortable about it, right? Maybe South African wine has a checkered history, and that's completely fine, but been lots of strides, lots of changes to do that, right? I think the best thing I always hear is, oh my gosh, I can't drink South African wine, it's got too much sulfites. I'm like, do you understand sulfites in wine? Do you actually know what they are? And if you had an allergy, a sulfur allergy, you wouldn't drink Coke, you wouldn't eat your processed meats, you wouldn't eat anything, right? So, even the amount of sulfur that you'll find is very, very heavily regulated. Maybe you just drank a really bad wine, and that's okay. But, then it's not fair to label a whole country because you just had a really bad wine, because it's really bad wine from the whole world, right? So it's just also then taking away these silly myths, or assumptions that people have about wine, and especially South African wine. We're very passionate, and like, South Africa is like one of the best New World wine growing regions. Like, they can compete with anyone, right? So when people just come and say things, we're like, no, let's educate you, let's take away these biases just a little bit. Let's show you the best of the continent. So I think that's the most important thing for me, right? I'm African, I'm passionate about African wine, also passionate about wine in general, but we want to remove a lot of these biases and myths that people have when it comes to wine.